as I said, it was built in 1895. It had everything that a home was supposed to have in those days. It had electricity, telephone, indoor plumbing, crucial here in Manitoba, central heating, hot water, and the novelty walk-in closets. They were so much a novelty that the city of Winnipeg used to tax them as separate rooms. Yes. Sir Hugh John Macdonald died in 1929, and at the time his widow decided to sell the house and its contents. And this place became a rooming house for ladies, during which time you name it and it was done to this house. They added rooms where there were none, painted, repainted. Well, sometime in the 1960s it was going to be torn down to build a high-rise. And that is when the Manitoba Historical Society fortunately got into the picture. They were able to purchase it and they restored it. It took them 4 years to restore this house. Now, as I said before, Lady Macdonald had decided to auction everything. So there are very, very few things in this house that actually belong to the Macdonalds. However, what the restorers did do was to make sure that absolutely everything in this home is period appropriate, and it is also appropriate to their station in life. Because to give you an idea, to build a home in 1895 in Winnipeg would have cost about $1,000. This cost $10,500.
10 times the amount.
So that already is telling you who lived here. This is the summer kitchen. The reason for that is because the walls are really thick, so for good insulation. So cooking in the real kitchen during the summer would have been extremely uncomfortable. So they built a shed, which during the winter they would have used for storage, and they had a stove. What is not clear is whether they had one stove that they were moving back and forth, or whether they had two. So we've got this, which is actually beautifully laid out. Now, when I was saying that the house was restored, they had to steam off between 12 and 13 layers of wallpaper before they actually got to the original wax, which in the case of the kitchen was oilcloth, which was no longer available in the 1970s, but they used a type of vinyl that was already available during the days of the Macdonalds. What was really interesting was that they were able to locate the original manufacturers so that the design and the color are exactly the same. A kitchen queen. And it was manufactured in Ontario, cast iron, and it operated with wood and coal. And it has some really interesting features. This is one of my favorites, the waffle maker, but flip it over and you make waffles on the other side. So actually very practical. And of course it has the warming ovens and everything else. The feature that made this is the warming oven up here. Here, and it has little warming shelves as well. Now, the most important feature about this stove is that for the very first time, it had a temperature gauge. Because until then, I mean, we take that for granted. How can we buy anything today without a temperature gauge? Well, they didn't have it in those days. So what they would have had to do, they were getting little pans with dough. They would put that in the oven. When it was ready, the oven was ready. All right. Now, as beautiful as this is, one has to remember that this had to be cleaned. Okay? That's where the servants came in. Breakfast had to be served promptly at 8, so they were up at least at 6 to get the breakfast ready, to clean this, and to polish it, because otherwise it would have rusted. So you have to think about the grease, the soot, and everything else. So here, ever. The two didn't mix. There was a complete distinction between family and the servants. Okay. Now, there are some interesting things here. Okay. And this is one of them.
Oh, a mustache cup.
That's right. I'm sure you know, it's a mustache cup. Here is the mustache. All right. Well, the reason for that is, if you think back in Victorian times, you have seen it in photographs and in movies, gentlemen had those beautiful mustaches. Okay. Now, to be kept that way, they had to be waxed. Well, today we use gels and mousses and everything else, but they had wax, to put it that way. So if they were drinking something hot, the steam would really have affected the wax. And it would have been an absolutely undignified thing for a gentleman to have all of a sudden a droopy mustache while he was eating. Now, my personal favorite is this.
Oh, yes.
This is an invalid cup, okay? When you really think about it, when you're in bed because you're not feeling well and you would like to have a cup of tea, well, by the time you prop yourself up, you get the tea, you're balancing act with a tray, the tea went everywhere. Mm-hmm. Well, this took care of the problem because the patient drank from here, and this kept the liquid from spilling over.
Right.
Victorians had absolutely beautiful things and incredibly practical. Mm-hmm. Well, baking table. That's what I'm saying. This kitchen is beautifully laid out. There is a baking table with the bins for the sugar and the flour and everything else that you needed. And there is a sink here where they would have washed veggies and fruits and things like that, but not the family's china. The family's china had to be washed. Here is the somewhere else.
Okay.
And this is the really very good china. Now, that tray up there, anybody wants to guess as to what it's made of?
Silver. I don't know.
No? How about paper mache? Right. Paper mache, like so many other things, was invented by the Chinese, but it was perfected by the British, who even made furniture out of paper mache. Obviously, it's not like little kids in schools make the paper mache, because what they would have done for that particular tray is to have 3 layers, bake them, add more, bake them again, until they had the right strength that they wanted. And this particular one is lacquered, is gilded, and has mother of pearl inlay.